Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Charlene Miller. I'm the director and ag agent here in Butler County. And I know it's kind of a hot topic, probably about across the eastern half of the state. Fall armyworms are have marched in and left certainly an impact on a lot of crop and brome fields. And so I asked Tina, which bless her heart, she did join us from vacation to do this webinar, but wanted to make sure we had the most current information. And I know there's a lot of questions out there. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tina. She's our Northeast area agronomist, and let her enlighten us on some armyworms. So, Tina.
Thank you, Charlene, for setting up this webinar. We'll see how long my actual video works. If it starts having issues, I'll just shut it off and y'all can just listen to me. Yeah, fall army worms, they are marching around, whether it's, South Central, whether it's Northeast or Southeast. There's conversations about them everywhere, and especially in our forage fields, whether it's our cool seasons, our brome and tall fescue, or our warm season. So I'm hoping with this presentation to give some answers to why do we have them, how do they compare this year to previous years, and what can we do about them this year. So let's see if I already messed up a PowerPoint. Okay, so the crime. We see our forage fields suddenly turning brown. In some of our sorghum fields, we're kind of seeing this shotgunning, these holes in the leaves. Well, that's the crime. Here's our criminal. These are our fall army worms. These are different than the true army worms. Both can cause damage, but really the ones of concern this time of year are these fall army worms. So it's this caterpillar form that's doing the damage. It's not the male or the female mobs. They're kind of just, they exist. The most they're doing is feeding on some nectar of plants, but they're not really eating anything. These females come into the edge of a field, the center of a field, anywhere in a field, lay their eggs, and it's these little fall armyworms that hatch. We know they're the fall armyworms from the green stripe on the body. And looking at the beautiful head of a fall armyworm, the inverted Y on its face. If it's a true armyworm, they are similar in color, but the face does not have this inverted Y. So we're not going to go into all the details of their life cycle. Just kind of know they come up from the south. So they come up from Mexico and southern states with the wind. So they do not overwinter in Kansas. But that means we have a problem with the fall armyworm until our first frost. So every year is going to be different with the fall armyworms, and weather patterns do play a major role. How strong those winds are coming up from the south and those temperature ranges that we may be in. So our optimal development and reproductive temperature, so when those fall armyworm moths are laying their eggs and doing their, most productiveness of them, is 78 to 86 degrees. You're probably thinking we're way above that right now, and I do have a map of current temperatures about 30 minutes ago in the state. But think about our nighttime temperatures. We're falling into this range, so we're seeing probably a lot of damage in the overnight. For the lowest temperature that are still going to be active, it's at 55 degrees. So that's for egg and for larval development. So that's where we say once we kind of go into the later in the fall, going into frost, that's when we really lose these guys, which is good. Larval development does decline when we're above 90 degrees and eggs stop hatching above 100 degrees. But really, once we fall back below those thresholds, they're going right back to eating. It's not really killing them when we're super hot. We're just slowing down their life cycle. So again, we're hot right now across the state, but that doesn't mean this evening and the afternoon hours going into nighttime, we're going to cool off back into that prime zone of that 78 to 86 degrees that they do like. So kind of going into some data from the last couple years. This is we working with Anthony Zukoff, the entomologist based out of Garden City. He does have traps deployed throughout the state, especially in the south. We do have some southeast ones and northeast where we are monitoring the female moths, where we're doing counts of those weekly. And we kind of correspond that to our egg hatching period. So this was back in 2022. We have a 4-month flight period where those flushes of female fall armyworms can come up from the south, or as those caterpillars go through their instars or their growth stages and then they pupate, so go through, metamorphosis like a butterfly, they are a moth, they can still have a second generation here in Kansas, which is this kind of red area of the graph. And this is also their prime. We have a lot of moths from 2022 shown in this graph. Peak season, kind of thinking about what crops are available when those eggs are hatching. The moths are probably not going to land in corn, especially as we know in southeast Kansas, we may already be harvested corn. They do like sorghum, but still kind of a taller forage for them. And that's where they really focus in our forage stands, our brome, our smooth brome, our tall fescues, our Bermuda grasses, our turf fields, our lawns, anything that looks nice and green, that's where they're going to land. And again, in this graph, everything stopped as soon as we hit that frost. Well, what about last year? This is up in Doniphan, so northeast Kansas. We had kind of an up and down of moths in the traps, but that doesn't mean that the caterpillar activity completely ceased until we really hit, the frost at the end of the season. So why are they so much worse this year? Counts are higher in the eastern portion of the state compared to the last couple years when Anthony Zukoff has been trapping. Some say, well, it must be because the traps are attracting them because there is a pheromone in the traps that does bring in the female moths. That does not mean we are attracting more moths to lay their eggs in the state of Kansas. For one, there's not that many traps. And two, it's not as if the pheromone can be smelt, so to speak, for miles and miles and miles. It's just more of we've kind of had this wet, warm cycle. And with the wind pulling them up, we're having just the right, um, conditions for them to go a little crazy this year. So, how many is too many? I know this is a very wordy slide, so we're going to kind of hit the highlights because we're talking about them existing. What's the threshold? When do we think of them as a problem? When do we not? Right here in this picture, we can see one of the cute little fall armyworms if you think they're cute. So for alfalfa, 1 to 2 caterpillars per square foot can kill seedling alfalfa. If it's taller alfalfa, 10 to 15 per square foot can kill it. If we say that we're in an alfalfa field and we have the ability to cut it, we can still cut the alfalfa to to save some of that forage. But if we're cutting too low to the ground, we're leaving those crowns more visible to those worms, they can go into them as well. Thinking about corn, corn is not really a crop we think of being hit hard by fall armyworms, especially in the eastern part of the state. We know we're deep into reproductive at this point. Most of our corn does have BT, so that, transgenic protection against the ear damage that fall armyworms used to cause a lot of. Sorghum, earlier in this, we see those shotgunning in those leaves of the younger sorghum. It can cause a little bit of problems, but towards yield, realistically, no. It's more when we are in this our heading phase of sorghum with 1 to 2 larvae per head, we can reduce yield by 5 to 10% because, again, they're eating those grains. We shouldn't be quite planted with wheat yet. We should still be in that wheat-free period if you were part of our wheat webinars a couple weeks ago about trying to think about the wheat curl mite. But as we kind of go deeper into the season, when we start planting wheat, that young wheat can be susceptible to fall armyworm damage because it's growing, it's active, and it's green. And in those situations, we may have to say we treat if there's 2 to 3 active larvae per foot. And then the next slide, I'm going to show kind of some differences in those larvae. I think it's the next slide. When we talk about pastures or, whether it's a pasture, whether it's a brome, tall fescue, whatever kind of forage field, if we see damage notable, so kind of swaths of brown areas or window painting, treatment may be warranted at 4 to 5 caterpillars per square foot. These two pictures show some of those damages I'm talking about. So for window painting, the little caterpillar has came through and eaten this one portion of the leaf. The photosynthetic area of that leaf is gone, so clearly it's not being as productive. Caterpillar has done its damage. And then in the picture on the right, that is showing the shotgunning effect of those fall armyworms kind of crawling up onto the sorghum and then eating down through the leaf, falling back to the ground. Not a super effective a way to get their food, but they do cause damage this way. And really, why they may be focusing on our forages that are, at this time of the year are typically cut. They're much shorter, so the fall armyworms don't have to work as hard to get their food source. There was a question that came through in the pre-registration about fall armyworm damage, so these big brown swaths where we've seen those armyworms march, and weed pressure coming in. This was a field I visited last year, kind of later into the summer, early fall. Clearly, we had some damage. We were counting quite a few fall armyworms out there. But in those kind of brown spots, we were seeing some, undesirable weeds popping in. Do I suggest us treating for the weeds if we're also trying to handle the fall armyworm damage? The fall armyworms are probably not going to eat on those broadleaf weeds if they don't have to. Some research has shown where they will eat on broadleaf weeds or like go work on our broadleaf crops, such as like a soybean, but they're really preferring our smaller, thinner blade grasses. So even if we have a non-desirable grass out there, they could be eating on it too. So do we need to, do we need to change our weed management in these situations? It's a potentially may have to because these weeds are popping up because the desirable forage we want has been hit back. Think of a grazing situation, right? If we overgraze a field, we start seeing those undesirable plants. And that's where we really have to start thinking about those herbicide plans. Thinking about what stage those weeds are in, if they're deep into flowering, we've kind of lost that window on an effective herbicide program. It might be if it's an area that we can, maybe a spot application or maybe mowing. Kind of really depends on what weed problem we're talking about and how much is popped into an area. In this field, I have some pictures where I followed up with it this spring. It looked really good. If that is a caveat with fall armyworm damage, I have some proof of it's not always the end of the world. It can be the end of the world, but not always. So another question came in about forages, fertility, where does this, the balance of it come? Always, if we can, let's do a soil test to check our pH, our P, and our K. I was on a conversation earlier today about why their brome stand wasn't as, it couldn't bounce back as well. And it kind of fell into that conversation of, well, what's your fertility plan? Not just applying nitrogen in the spring to, help with that green up, make it more productive so we get more forage, but kind of thinking about, is our pH in the correct range? We are in eastern Kansas. We're not going to be in those high pH ranges like western Kansas. And with rain, with with consistent nitrogen applications, we are lowering our pH over time. brome, tall fescue, they are a bit sensitive to that pH dropping into the low sixes, into the high fives. So, kind of being more aware of where our pH could be and how it's affecting how well that forage is growing when it is actively growing. Our cool season forages do tend to get hit pretty hard with the fall armyworm damage. Why? They're in dormancy right now. It's super hot. Our cool seasons do not like to grow when it's hot, just kind of how they're built. So if they're not actively growing, they get hit by fall armyworms. Well, then they don't have a whole long amount of season when it cools down, but then we don't before frost. So it's kind of that catch 22 of, are we giving that forage really the best time to catch back up after it's been hit? And if we are already in a low pH situation, maybe we're at low soil phosphorus and potassium, it's just another kind of, ding to it, making it hit down the ladder of, I can't be as more productive. I can't bounce back as well. Kind of thinking about crops and diseases. Our corn fields, our soybean fields tend to do better when they're have good fertility, right? They can hold up that damage better. Same thing applies to our forages. So, what about, again, all this to say, if we're thinking about fertility programs, if we can do a fall soil test, see what our pH, our P and K is in the fall to do an application in the fall, it is more effective and efficient for those types of products. Whereas I still suggest our nitrogen recommendations in the spring. So it could be even early spring, post soil unfreezing. So that February time period, really trying to get that nitrogen to when the forage is waking up and greening up so we don't lose nitrogen and we can just make, the best bang for that buck for that application. So touching a little bit about fertility. Before we go into our chemical options for fall armyworm control, do we have non-chemical control options? Kind of digging in around, we have some parasitic wasps and flies, like pictured here, can lay their larvae on the fall armyworm, but kind of relying on that to really, dampen down these fall armyworm populations is not going to happen, especially not here in Kansas. Also reading Wisconsin and Minnesota were saying birds, toads, skunks, and some domestic fowl will eat them. But I don't know who has an army of, geese or ducks that can go out and eat all these fall armyworms, considering just how fast, those moths are laying their eggs. Those eggs are hatching in this prime time of the season. I got a question about what about using soap to, suffocate the caterpillars. For one, if yes, soap can suffocate soft-bodied insects. For one, if you can get the soap to them. Two, I would suggest leaving the Dawn dish soap to cleaning wildlife because the combination of soap and sunlight on grass can and more than likely will kill it worse than the fall armyworm damage that they are doing currently. So, if we're thinking about soap, maybe let's not go down that road. Leave it to the ducks. So there's this really large table that came out in Kansas in our agronomy e-update 2 weeks ago now. This was from Anthony Zukoff, who put together, what the chemical names were, what the trade names were, what these mode of actions were, and which crops they, it can be applied to. Just going ahead and saying real quick, this lanate down here, there's an asterisk over here. It is for Bermuda grass only. So I'm not going to step through this table. I'm just more showing there is options out there. You will see in our mode of action, a lot of these are the 3A products. So it's a certain active, mode of action. The one that Anthony and I have kind of been both more in favor of using is this Bisage. I'm not saying I'm great at pronouncing chemical names. This one, this 3A and 28 group, it is labeled for almost every forage out there, and it's a double active ingredient. And I have a slide a little bit more about it. So it's a double active ingredient and it has a pretty good residual. When we start thinking about our concerns with treatments, this is my hand last year going and picking up some fall army worms in a very small area. There's 3 right here, and there was a lot more on the ground. So we had that 4 to 5 per square foot threshold for spraying. But the problem becomes the varying sizes of our fall army worms here. We have these 2 smaller ones up further onto my fingers. Those ones would actually be hit by an insecticide application. Whereas the one at the palm of my hand, that one is over an inch long, so they're not really going to be hit hard at all by some of our insecticides when we start thinking about some of these products that may or may not be on that cheaper end. It's really just that active ingredient doesn't affect them as well. So this Vantacor and the Sage both list that they can handle bigger caterpillars. But as we get into this inch to 3 inch range, they've really ate all they're going to do. And they're just kind of waiting around, waiting to pupate to go into their little, their next form so then they can emerge as a very ugly moth. So I talked a little bit about this Basage double active ingredient. It works as a contact, an ingestion, and an ovicidal working group. So it is a kind of a 3-way option of trying to do some coverage, thinking about, it's kind of maybe it's raining, maybe it's not. This product is listed as rain fast once dried on the plants. So when we think about herbicides, some of our herbicides may say, 2 hours before they're rain safe, or, I've worked with a product that was 6 hours before it was rain safe. This one straight up says rain safe once dried on plants. Maybe a good option in those situations of we have good coverage, we have a good residual of 2 to 3 weeks with this product. It does have some grazing limitations, so if you're going to be wanting to apply this into a pasture, really see what those grazing limitations are. If you're applying this into a field, this was a conversation I had last week about application into alfalfa, and then they were thinking about, well, maybe we should just cut the alfalfa and save what, get what forage we can. No matter what product you go with, always check the label, that is the law, and see what the harvest intervals are because they're going to vary whether it's alfalfa or some of our other forages. So you're maybe thinking, well, what's the cost? Was not able to find the cost of this product, but I did ask some of our agents throughout the area of what have you been hearing for pricing? And I heard for insecticide applications, the generics of some of the products listed on this table have been running for about $3 to $4 per acre, where the application cost is $8 to $12 per acre, really depending on who you're going through, what, the ability they have to get out there and spray. So if we're thinking about a 50-acre field, it's about $550 to $800 per treatment. And I say per treatment because we may have additional flushes of fall armyworms throughout, up till frost. Just because we do an application now, it may last 2 to 3 weeks. We may see another flush of those fall armyworms. Last year, I heard of some folk spraying 3 times, and I know that hits the heart really hard of how can we afford to do that? Well, our other option, in some situations, we might have already lost those fields. What about replanting or reseeding? What's that cost going to be? Well, just kind of breaking it down as easily as possible. If we're trying to get seed and it's $60 per acre of 20 pounds per acre at $3 a pound. If planting costs are $22 per acre, this was from Ag Manager, so I didn't just pull the number from Magic. A 50-acre field could cost $4,000 to $5,000 to replant. So, it might be one of those options where spraying is the way to go. If it's too far gone, we may have to start thinking about replant. If we think about our time frame to replant, we're kind of in that early stage going into mid-September for a fall replant. What about replanting forages and fall armyworm damage? It's still a risk. I mentioned not every field is lost, so there is hope. This was September of last year. I'm in this field. It was not one of those fields that got detrimented, right? The fall armyworms did their march, they did some eating. It looked really bad last year. We come back this year in the brome, yes, and the annual bluegrass were there, but we had forage. Actually, in this field, the brome actually looked a lot better where the fall armyworms had been compared to not. Sorry if you heard the dog. So, some questions again that I haven't completely covered. Can it kill? So, some years, year after year, it seems like we're getting really hard fall armyworm damage. Is it going to kill the brome again? I think it's a potential. I don't want to take it off. It could happen. It's really thinking about that management of have we been, has it been good fertility management in this field? We're just sadly in one of those areas that seem to get hit hard again and again and again, like that Wichita area. Can we switch up our forages? Is there one that's maybe more fall armyworm resistant? Bad news. I feel like I'm the bearer of bad news for this. All the research I have found, and there's not a whole lot, sadly, about fall armyworms and which forages are better, they all seem to get hit at the same rate. Our warm seasons seem to pull out of it a bit better sometimes because they have a different growth pattern, right? They're not quite in dormancy right now. So that kind of falls to, do fall armyworms prefer cool season forages? I think we just see the damage worse in them because those cool season forages are not, they're in dormancy right now. They're not really actively growing. So once the fall armyworms come in, they make that field brown. There's not really a whole lot to bounce back from right that moment. And the question of, can I just spray the edges of the field? I talked with the entomologist about this, and my gut feeling was the same. We suggest no. Because the reality is, you probably have the fall armyworms much deeper than just the edge of the field. So we are suggesting get out to the field and scout to see how far that damage is, see where they're going. Because just because we spray that edge of the field doesn't mean they're already in the middle of the field. We can't really just spray, our ditches and hope that they won't come on over. Fall armyworm mobs are landing wherever they want, laying their eggs, and then proceed to march with those fall armyworms. So I went through that fast. I did see we have some questions. Um, Charlene, how are we doing this portion?
If you want to read through them, or I can read them out loud and then you
I can
answer.
I will read through them.
Perfect.
So I have gotten from Margit commented that GMO crops have wiped out um Arana, too late now. I mean, the problem has been a lot of research has been done in fall armyworms, and that's why we have BT corn, BT cotton, BT peanuts, I believe, because that's where fall armyworm damage was causing, the most economical damage because we're losing entire, fields of corn, all the corn's gone. Forages have always sadly been kind of that back burner cropping area. What do we do? There's not a whole lot of funding for it. So where can we go? And that's where I'm trying to focus some of my research of, can we make our forage systems more resilient to these fall armyworms, because we're not seeming to stop them. Okay, Kathy, is the damage in brome fields happening after hay is cut, or is it already there, just not noticeable until after cutting. Um, I think this is a dependent on year. I've kind of talked to some folk. It feels like in some areas we might have cut forage the brome a little late due to rain. So when we start cutting it back, when we cut it when it's a little later into the season, it doesn't have as much time to bounce back. So there's just kind of that dynamic in there of the forage doesn't have a whole lot of time to bounce back after cutting. Could they already be there before we cut? We weren't really getting a whole lot of trapping announcements from Anthony that they were here too early. Sadly, there's like with some of our other insects, we can't really, see them. Not everyone monitors them as much as we try to. It would help, and then hope that answers that one. Margit, it would help to know what's the life cycle between larva and pupate and for the best treatment in this window. So that's falling back to those fall armyworms if they're smaller than an inch because they're eating very fast, they're growing very fast. They are heat unit dependent, but they're also food dependent. So as long as it's hot, but not too hot, above that 90-degree threshold, they're eating. And so they could be eating for, 3 days to 10 days. That's where we kind of say that 2 week window is really what our insecticides really can cover. Because once they're that 1 inch, really 1.5 inch to 3 inches, that treatment window has pretty much been limited because they aren't eating as much. And all they're doing is just kind of crawling around waiting for their body to say, ah, yes, time to time to go pupate. Are worms harvested in forage harmful to livestock? This question came up earlier this week. I double checked with Anthony. These are not like blister beetles that, they do where a blister beetle would cause major concerns in forages. As for fall armyworms, they don't carry a toxin or anything really that's going to cause an issue to livestock. From Brett, under the impression that armyworms prefer tender, soft leaves than plants that were more mature, often have more lignin. Correct, exactly. And it's also kind of thinking about big leaves of sorghum and corn versus those small leaves of our forages. Yeah, there is a lignin difference. Kind of doing some more reading because I've been hammered by that question too of what do they want to eat? I don't really think they're as picky as we think they are. They're just kind of landing and go, ah, yes, the eggs have hatched. Time to go march and find food. Um, so when we think about corn, you have to think that's a lot more work to crawl up a corn stalk. It's a lot more work to crawl up the sorghum plants, whereas our forages, maybe even young wheat, that's really close to the ground. Our alfalfa, it's a different stem structure too, right? Where they don't have to work as hard to get up. Insects are going to do whatever they can to spend the least amount of energy to get the most amount of energy to move through their life cycle as quick as possible. Does that answer the questions we have? That's all the questions I'm seeing so far.
All right. If you have any other questions, go ahead and drop them into chat. If you don't have chat capabilities at the moment, you're welcome to unmute and ask as well. And Tina did put her contact information up there. If you're from Butler County, I'll drop mine in the chat. If you happen to be from another county and not sure who your agent is, feel free to shoot me a message and I can get you in contact with them or give you their website of where to go. Tina, it looks like we have another question with Brett.
When might be the safe date to sow wheat or plant fescue? Sowing wheat, that's just a hot mess either way because of the wheat curl mite, right? Ugh. That's a mixed bag. For planting fescue, I think it's up until mid-September. Maybe, yeah, I think it's mid-September is our cutoff for planting. Also, it's kind of is it just dependent on those fall armyworms? No. We do know if we don't get those timely rains to get get the grass, germinated up, much like wheat, the seed's just going to sit there and we risk the seed getting eaten to other things. Um, so is there really a safe window? The entomologist may say, wait till after frost was, but as the agronomist, I said, you're too late really for planting, right? So it's that kind of which problem are we going to try to deal with? Um, I got from Margit, would you recommend plant tissue testing to identify whether there are micronutrient deficiencies? For forages in this time of the year, we don't have usually enough leaf material because we've already cut that we're not in. I don't see where it's a micronutrient problem. It's more probably a macronutrient problem. But again, if we've already harvested for forages, or it's an active pasture situation, it's not going to give us a full answer. When it comes to forages, I'm not saying we don't have the most robust system for those tissue samplings, but it's not as much like corn in our traditional cropping system, right? When we think about tissue sampling for our forages, it's more on that nutritional side for livestock for ration balancing. What's those nitrate levels? If there's prussic acid, what's our protein? That's really where forages have fallen. Is it a bad thing? Depends on who you talk to. I don't see it to me. I don't see where the cost of doing micronutrient testing for a deficiency is going to warrant where we're going to really change anything for forages. Just because we know those margins are super tight, and I already kind of did the math, it's going to be expensive to do an insecticide application, but it's also going to be expensive to do a replant. It's going to be expensive if we're going to start having more and more encroachment of those undesirable weeds too, right? So it's kind of that whole system of where can we make the most bang out of our buck? And sometimes it's just going to be what's going on in our soils. Is our pH too low? Can there be a management change for when those cutting windows are? Are we going to have to just move out some of our cool season grasses? I don't know if that portion's the answer because, again, our warm seasons can get hit just as hard. Okay. Alan said some of the damaged hay ground has horse nettle activity growing, some of it in bloom, some not. Do you spray herbicide now or wait till next spring? So with horse nettle, since it's already in bloom, some products like 2,4-D may hit it, but it's kind of really late in its growth cycle, so it may be a slight waste because it's going to just finish up its cycle and die anyway. It is actually a weed that if you could mow it, it's going to make it die back some because it's going to have to use the reserve some of its root to try to come back. Um, it's not something I'd per se wait till spring to hit because it's going to grow back even heavier. Horse nettle is nasty. We have a bunch of it in our goat pasture out back, and that's what we're going to go mow once I'm done with this.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, Caitlin has a question, Tina.
Okay, Caitlin. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I was not paying attention. If there's fall armyworms in their fields and they haven't cut, and in their pasture and they haven't been brush cut, should they spray? And so, what's the best way to spray since they're all under that forage? The fun of insecticides, some people maybe, there might be that suggestion of, oh, it's a pasture, let's go spray it with a drone. A lot of people actually will not do insecticides with drones because it's such a major liability, and you actually can't get the spray coverage you need with insecticides. We really need to increase that water per acre to get good coverage to really penetrate through, even if we're thinking about, forage stubble to tall stubble like this. So depending on the product, if we're going to go down that option, really go see what the maximum amount of water you can use with that product to really try to push it through that canopy. Um, so that would be the how and what's the best way to spray it to get through all that forage. I have heard from a few folk, they were mainly alfalfa fields, so I know it's not quite as applicable. I was suggesting go cut the alfalfa, go try to save as much forage as you can so they don't keep eating everything, and then see what those numbers are, because depending on those sizes, right? If they're a bigger fall armyworm, the product isn't going to hit it, right? They're moving on with their lives. But if you cut the forage back and you still see a bunch of little worms, then it might be good for the application, especially if we're in that 4 to 5 caterpillar threshold. Reality is, I was in a field last year. It was way past that threshold. Y'all seen the pictures of it. I know he never sprayed. So it is a little bit of, are we risking the forage or are we not? I hope that answered Caitlin.
All right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any pop up. Tina, thank you. And thank you to everybody who took time to join us today, and hope we were able to answer your questions and give you tools to make wise decisions and what works best for you and your operations. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Tina, myself, or the local agent in your county. I will send the recording for this probably be Monday, but I will get that sent out to everybody as well. If there's no other questions, that's all we have today. Thank you.